So today's video is based off a question that a viewer submitted via a comment by the name of Adamantine Love. The essence of the question had to do with the similarities that we see in the Urantia Book with Caligastia's 100-person corporeal staff. They came with him as part of his administration against the 200 Watchers that we hear about in the Book of Enoch. So I know. The accounts and, of course, the numbers that are associated with these stories don't necessarily line up. But as a mentor professor of mine once said when I called him out for inflating his stories more and more with every one of his classes that I took, he responded by saying one day, "Every good story deserves some embellishment." So come on, I mean, before the advent of books, radio, and other forms of media such as television, stories were most certainly a form of entertainment. Mix in the likelihood of confabulating these stories due to old age and translation distortions, and I can easily posit a theory surrounding the fallen 200, being the corporeal staff of Azazel, who is known in the Urantia Book as Caligastia, our once planetary prince. So for those of you that are already shaking your heads here, we know that Michael's apostles most certainly embellished his miracle workings due to desperately wishing for the promised Messiah, and of course to prove to others that they had chosen the true Son of God. We also know in the Urantia Book that one of the newer books of the New Testament Bible, the Book of Revelation, was heavily distorted after John the Revelator's death. Consequently, with a well over 300 plus year difference between these two texts, I see it being very plausible that the original and unaltered Book of Enoch that nobody has could have most certainly held very similar tenets to the Urantia Book and their account of the actual planetary default. I mean, seriously, maybe you can picture yourself sitting in front of a campfire thousands of years ago as a grandmother or grandfather, retelling a story to your grandchildren that your own grandfather had told you. Since you, of course, never witnessed such angels or any other celestial personality, you must perceive these accounts as being myths, deviating from the once historical account that was once part of your family tradition, and decide one day they deserve a little spice here and there. It's really not that far-fetched. All right, let's dive in. The Book of Enoch and the Urantia Book are separated by hundreds, if not thousands of years, yet they both attempt to answer the same haunting questions about an epic rebellion, forbidden knowledge, a special tree, and of course, divine justice. One emerges from the apocalyptic imagination of Second Temple Judaism, while the other from a modern revelatory text claiming to unveil cosmic administration and the Urantia Book. To compare them is to trace the evolution of myth and revelation across time, and to ask whether they might be two expressions of the same archetypal drama. On my 11/15/2025 YouTube post, when it came to responding to that commenter, I began this investigation with the overarching question in my mind, which was, what is the true reason why the Book of Enoch was arguably one of Jesus' favorite texts in the Bible? And of course, for those of you that will say that the Book of Enoch is not part of the original Bible or is non-canonical, I would respond to that statement indicating that there are still religious sects that believe the Book of Enoch should still be included in the Holy Bible and use it as such as the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church and the Eritrean Orthodox Tewahedo Church. Hopefully I said that right. I mean, according to the Urantia Book, it was this very text where Jesus assimilated his Son of Man title and was caught reading such a text very frequently. I would imagine if the text was completely made up, I don't believe that Christ Michael would have wasted his time with it. I would argue that parts of the text probably resonated with him since he could most certainly see through its distortions and was reminded of the dark history that plagued our planet for roughly 200,000 years, which was, of course, the Lucifer Rebellion. In the Urantia Book, Mount Hermon was ground zero, from whence these rebellious angels fell from grace, a fact that likely did not change due to embellishment. In the Urantia Book, Mount Hermon was special because it was the site of Jesus' great temptation. That's right, it was not in the desert. a final universe-level struggle with Satan over loyalty and sovereignty, and where he completed his self-mastery before his crucifixion. This circumstantial evidence suggests that the mountain was inhabited by Caligastia, or at the very least, their representative agents in both accounts. In the Urantia Book, Jesus also went there with his disciples, Peter, James, and John, for the Transfiguration, where they witnessed a glimpse of his divine glory. This is just one of many key items to suggest the mountain's spiritual significance, sanctity, and potential political correlation. The mountain had long been considered a sacred and powerful location, making it symbolically a significant stage for these pivotal events. I would imagine if we do have spiritual representation, then this location is likely, at the very least, an outpost for divine administration. In 126.3.6, it highlights this keen interest that Jesus had in the Book of Enoch when it states,
"In the course of this year, Jesus found a passage in the so-called Book of Enoch, which influenced him in the later adoption of the term Son of Man as a designation for his pastoral mission on Urantia. He had thoroughly considered the idea of the Jewish Messiah and was firmly convinced that he was not to be that Messiah. He longed to help his father's people, but he never expected to lead Jewish armies in overthrowing the foreign domination of Palestine. He knew he would never sit on the throne of David at Jerusalem. Neither did he believe that his mission was that of a spiritual deliverer or moral teacher solely to the Jewish people. In no sense, therefore, could his life mission be the fulfillment of the intense longings and supposed messianic prophecies of the Hebrew Scriptures. At least, not as the Jews understood these predictions of the prophets. Likewise, he was certain he was never to appear as the Son of Man, depicted by the prophet Daniel.
The Book of Enoch expands on this cryptic passage. In Genesis 6, 1-4, which speaks of the sons of God who took human wives and produced the Nephilim. Enoch dramatizes this with vivid detail. 200 watchers descend to earth, captivated by human women. That was it. That 200 lustful angels abandoned their posts with no other pretenses to such a rebellion. Seems to be lacking something, doesn't it? Their union produces giants that devastate the earth, consuming all resources and turning to violence. The Watchers also teach forbidden arts, metallurgy, enchantments, astrology, and cosmetics. Their leader, Azazel, becomes the archetype for corruption, eventually condemned to fiery imprisonment. However, the question as to why Azazel was their leader in the first place goes majorly unanswered. The Urantia Book describes a different but resonant story that perhaps makes more sense. Caligastia, the planetary prince of Urantia, joins Lucifer's rebellion against divine authority. The Lucifer rebellion was associated with a manifesto that the brilliant brother of Caligastia created, preying on the fears and insecurities of those who defied God. Eventually, Lucifer's first lieutenant and brother, Satan, was able to come down to Earth, also known as Urantia, and was able to successfully compel Caligastia to join their cause. But before all of this, Caligastia had a corporeal staff of 100 beings that were immortal, materialized to assist humanity, and was able to successfully complete their mandate for roughly 300,000 years. And as another fun fact here, both stories, the Book of Enoch and the Urantia Book, had the Tree of Life. The Book of Enoch describes the Tree of Life as a fragrant, inaccessible tree until the final judgment, after which its fruit will be given to the righteous to grant them long life. In the Urantia Book, the Tree of Life only granted long life, or immortal life, to its celestial agents that belonged to the corporeal staff, and also Adam and Eve. When it came to everybody else, the Urantia Book indicated that the Tree of Life would not prolong anyone's life whatsoever. That presumably, these divine energies can only be absorbed by higher beings than ourselves. In the Urantia Book, the tree had leaves and blossoms that would never wither. Speaking of long life, in fact, many of these staff agents were associated with legends around the world of otherworldly beings that taught agriculture, science, justice, and spirituality. This is ironic since, like stated previously, in the Book of Enoch, after the rebellion, many of these same teachers began preaching forbidden knowledge and arts as part of their defiance. I'm sure such a temptation did not appear from nowhere. What we do know in the Urantia Book is that many of these corporeal staff members of Caligastia did indeed defect and interbreed with humans, producing the Nodites. It was similar interbreeding. In fact, that was the main offense to God that was also correlated with the Adam and Eve default. Their teachings, once intended to uplift, became distorted, leading to confusion and division between the Adamites and the Nodites. Both texts describe celestial rebellion, hybrid offspring, and corrupted knowledge, though in different idioms. Fun fact, when it comes to Cain, son of Eve and Cano, he actually did turn his life around after killing his brother, and was eventually indwelt by his own thought adjuster due to his eventual righteous living. But that's for another video. All right, so let's ask ourselves the very first question as to whether the fallen 100 became 200 through oral embellishment, which is often the basis of the fluidity of myth. In the Urantia Book, the corporeal staff numbered 100. In Enoch, the watchers numbered 200. Oral traditions often magnify numbers to heighten drama. Doubling the number emphasizes the overwhelming scale of rebellion and how the world was negatively affected. In addition, it is likely that these watchers had their own slew of human and otherworldly followers, which likely confabulated this number. It is plausible that a tradition of 100 rebels, transmitted orally, became 200 in later retellings, especially if we count their descendants that eventually joined their cause. The symbolic resonance of 200, suggesting completeness or irresistible force, may have driven this embellishment. Much like the Battle of Thermopylae, when most people acknowledge that 300 Spartans took on up to 300,000 Persians. Well, that number would be almost accurate if we didn't omit the almost 7,000 other troops that assisted the Spartans. Despite a staggering 44-to-1 ratio, many people still believe 300 Spartans, led by King Leonidas, likely enhancing the impact of the story. Thus, the discrepancy between 100 and 200 may not reflect different events, but different narrative strategies or perspectives of the witnesses of the event. Oral tradition thrives on exaggeration, and numbers are often the first to be magnified or distorted. The doubling of rebels may have been a way to impress upon listeners the enormity of the fall, transforming a manageable number into a cosmic multitude. In terms of creative licensing, simply doubling the number of the Watchers is neither that creative nor distinctly unrelated to the original 100 number. In other words, we didn't have a 573 fallen Watchers or 94 corporeal staff members that's easy to forget when retelling these stories. In fact, if you want to get real specific about our numbers here, even in the Urantia Book, only 60 members of said planetary staff actually went into rebellion, found in 67 4.2. But like I said earlier, the corporeal staff were likely not the only members of the Urantia rebellion, which makes the final number here of traitors a little more elusive. Now, the next question here is whether Caligastia changed his name to Azazel, which invites a symbolic reinterpretation. Names in myth are not mere labels, but identities bound to divine purpose. For those of you that don't know, the Romans renamed all of the Greek major pantheon of gods, like Jupiter for Zeus. Let's not also forget that Jesus' original name in Hebrew was Yeshua, a shortened form of Yehoshua, which is the Hebrew name for Joshua, signifying name distortions. I'm not even mentioning some of the dual names that Christ's apostles even had, which likely exceeds the number 5 for having dual identities. However, I would imagine Azazel would have forsake his name in order to reject his divine role, making such a betrayal psychologically easier. Caligastia, in the Urantia Book, betrays his station and joins Lucifer's rebellion. Azazel and Enoch corrupts humanity with forbidden arts, mentioning very little of a divine hierarchy. Both figures embody defiance. While there is no textual evidence that Caligastia literally became Azazel, the archetypal resonance is strong. Azazel may be a mythic refracting of Caligastia's betrayal, a new name adopted in defiance. Myth often transforms historical or revelatory figures into archetypes, and Azazel may be such a transformation. It's a lot like how the Egyptian deity Thoth also became the Greek deity Hermes. Through traditions and translations, the act of renaming oneself in a rebellion is a powerful symbol. It signifies the total betrayal of family and the rejection of divine identity for the adoption of a new persona aligned with corruption. Caligastia's betrayal could thus be mythologically refracted as Azazel's corruption, a new name for an old tale of ancient treachery. The next investigation posits the question as to whether the Nephilim were actually the Nodites, which draws a distinct parallel. The Nephilim and Enoch are giants born of the union between Watchers and human women. They wreak havoc, consuming all resources and turn to violence. The Nodites in the Urantia Book are the descendants of the rebellious corporeal staff who interbred with humans. They became a distinct race, larger and stronger than average, and often hostile to divine authority. Both traditions describe hybrid beings, born of the rebellion, destabilizing human society. The exaggeration of size and violence in Enoch may be a mythic amplification of the Nodites' genetic distinctiveness. Thus, the Nephilim can be seen as a mythic ethos of the Nodites. As a fun fact, or not so fun of a fact for women, painful childbirth wasn't always a thing, and was majorly due to the partial failure of the Adamic mission that would have greatly alleviated such a phenomenon if we had more violet race interbreeding. In fact, we learned that childbirth was not a painful or distressing ordeal to Fanta nor her immediate descendants in 63:4.2. The hybrid offspring symbolized the corruption of the divine order, the mingling of celestial rebellion with human frailty. They embody the consequences of defiance, living reminders of the fall. Their violence and excess dramatize the destabilizing effect of rebellion, turning myth into a cautionary tale. Another great theory that I have is talking about that whole giants thing a step further, which would be a potential great way to attempt to save the Adamite lineage by creating a fabricated story indicating that if you go visit and potentially interbreed with the Nodites, an evil giant might consume you. What we do know in the Urantia Book is that the corporeal staff did create their own distinct being on their own, which was called secondary midwayers, that are caught between the material and spiritual realms, being best represented as ghosts. The next query we will entertain is forbidden knowledge, taught by the Watchers, which was a distortion of the corporeal staff's teaching mandate, aligning closely with Urantia's narrative. The staff was intended to uplift humanity through cultural and spiritual guidance. In rebellion, their teachings became corrupted. Enoch again describes the Watchers as the teaching metallurgy, enchantments, and astrology, knowledge that, while not inherently evil, was misused and prematurely revealed. This distortion mirrors the Urantia account of Caligastia's staff twisting their mandate into rebellion. The forbidden arts in Enoch may thus be mythic representations of corrupted planetary instruction, a dramatization of the misuse of knowledge. Knowledge itself is neutral, but its misuse can be destructive. The Watcher's teachings symbolize the premature revelation of knowledge, given without wisdom, leading to corruption. The Urantia staff's distortion of their mandate mirrors this, showing how rebellion twists even noble intentions into destructive outcomes. Both scenarios suggest these entities had some sort of previous teaching capacity. All right, as for the next point, this includes whether 70 generations of imprisonment were chosen to await Michael's arrival, connecting Enoch's apocalyptic timeline with Urantia's Christology. In Enoch, the Watchers are bound for 70 generations until their judgment. In the Urantia Book, Michael of Nebadon, also known as Jesus, incarnates on Urantia to complete his mission and ends the rebellion of his sons. 70 generations could symbolize the waiting period until Michael's arrival, a numerological marker of divine timing. While the text differs in chronology, the motive of cosmic rebels awaiting judgment until the arrival of a savior figure is strikingly parallel. The number 70, often symbolic of completeness in Jewish tradition, may have been chosen to signify the fullness of time until Michael's mission. Such a number is a synthesis of divine and material origins. The waiting period dramatizes the inevitability of divine judgment, showing that rebellion cannot endure forever and must eventually face divine justice, embodied in the arrival of a savior figure. In 134 8.7, we learn of the final word of divine justice when the Urantia Book indicates,
To many of the proposals and counter-proposals of the emissaries of Lucifer, Jesus only made reply, May the will of my paradise Father prevail, and you, my rebellious son, may the ancients of days judge you divinely. I am your creator Father. I can hardly judge you justly, and my mercy you have already spurned. I commit you to the adjudication of the judges of a greater universe.
Consequently, such an arbitrary number like 70 can either be meant to highlight the enormous amount of time that people waited for Michael's arrival, or the protracted Gabriel versus Lucifer legal case that is currently being heard in the universe courts. The last question I investigate has to do with that fiery prison, and if that had to do with the Ancients of Days and the liquid river of fire. This invites a metaphysical perspective. In Enoch, the Watchers are cast into fiery pits, a vivid image of punishment. The Urantia Book describes the Ancients of Days as the supreme judges of the superuniverses, with the river of liquid fire symbolizing divine justice and energy. The fire prison could thus be a mythic metaphor for the cosmic tribunal of the Ancients of Days, with the imagery of fire representing the consuming and purifying power of divine judgment. Fire in myth often symbolizes divine presence, purification, and judgment. Thus, Enoch's fiery pits may be symbolic representations of the Ancients of Days tribunal. The imagery of fire dramatizes the consuming power of divine justice, turning punishment into a vivid mythic symbol. In the Urantia Book, we learn of the ultimate judgment of soul annihilation, which some members of the Lucifer Rebellion will likely receive due to their iniquity or believe that such sinful acts were in fact the right thing to do. Perhaps there is a fiery process for obliterating a soul or a personality that we are unaware of. Taken together, these comparisons suggest that the Book of Enoch and the Urantia Book may be seen as two mythic lenses on the same archetypal drama: the rebellion of celestial beings, the corruption of humanity, a magical tree, and of course, the eventual triumph of divine justice. Enoch dramatizes the fall with vivid mythic imagery. The Urantia Book systematizes the rebellion into a cosmic administrative narrative. Both grapple with the same existential question: why do beings rebel against God? How does forbidden knowledge corrupt? What is the destiny of those who defy divine order? And how does salvation arrive through a chosen figure? The narrative of rebellion is archetypal, appearing across cultures. In Mesopotamian myth, gods rebel against higher deities. In Greek myth, Titans defy Zeus. In Christian tradition, Satan rebels against God. Enoch and Urantia are part of this broader mythic pattern. They dramatize the tension between divine authority and creaturely freedom. They warn of the dangers of forbidden knowledge. They promise eventual judgment and restoration. Their differences reflect cultural context. Enoch's apocalyptic imagination versus Urantia's modern revelatory systematization. But their similarities suggest a shared archetypal core. The embellishment of numbers, the forsaking of names, the birth of hybrid beings, the distortion of knowledge, the waiting for judgment, and the fiery prison. All these motifs recur across myth. They are not literal historical details, but symbolic dramatizations of rebellion. Oral tradition magnifies numbers. Myth transforms names. Hybrid beings symbolize corruption and can represent a cautionary tale. Forbidden knowledge dramatizes misuse. 70 generations symbolize divine timing on a material plane of existence. Fire symbolizes judgment. These motives resonate across Enoch and Urantia, suggesting that both texts are mythic expressions of the same cosmic drama. Myth and its distortion of facts versus its core that's still very much real. The Book of Enoch, though not canonical in most traditions, profoundly influenced Jewish and Christian apocalyptic thought. Its imagery of watchers, Nephilim, and fiery judgment shaped later demonology and eschatology. The Urantia Book, though modern, seeks to provide a comprehensive cosmology, embedding rebellion within a vast universe of administrative hierarchies. Both texts seek to explain the mystery of evil, why celestial beings rebel, how humanity is corrupted, and how divine justice prevails. They offer different idioms, but similar answers. Rebellion may lead to corruption, but divine judgment is ultimately inevitable. Thank you again for watching today's video. Your continued support, and I'll see you on the next one.